Greetings and welcome to another episode of Canadian History X. Today, we're going to look at Dominion Day. On July 1st, 1867, 151 years ago, the country of Canada was born. It was not born through war or rebellion, but out of cooperation and agreement. For that first Dominion Day, as Canada Day was once called, towns throughout Ontario, Quebec, New Brunswick, and Nova Scotia all celebrated becoming a new country. Some celebrated more than others, and today I thought we would look at how various places in Canada kicked off this first day for the new country. So let's dive in. The first community we will visit is Lefroy, or Innisfil, Ontario. Located 80 kilometers north of Toronto, residents of the village celebrated with a picnic at Degrassi Point. A small start, but a good way to kick off our Dominion Day throwback look. In Orillia, Ontario, there was double reason to celebrate. The community was incorporated as a village in 1867 as well, making it the same age as Canada. Things started in the community at 10 a.m. with a rifle salute to honor the special day. Captain Darling then organized his volunteers, and God Save the Queen was sung, followed by 3 cheers for Queen Victoria and 3 cheers for the new Dominion. Nothing else was planned for the day, so the volunteers organized target practice and invited members of the new town to take part. While many of the volunteers showed up and gave a great display, there was very little interest from the residents themselves. A big reason for this was the taverns were all open. That being said, many ladies did come out. Things would have ended there if not for Mr. Ross of Orillia House and his invitation for the volunteers to join him at the hotel for a magnificent supper. A visitor from England, Mr. Wigmore, complimented the volunteers and said they were as good a set of men as he had ever seen, either in Canada or England. Songs from Sergeant Major McKinley began, with him singing "We Are a Band of Volunteers," followed by Corporal Higgins singing "Fill Me a Tankard Strong." Lieutenant Slavin arrived after the songs to represent the village fathers and called for a round of toasts for the Queen, the Army, and the Navy. Sergeant Major McKinley then began singing Paddy's Wedding, and the dinner concluded with a round of prolonged cheers. Heading over to Markham, Ontario, nothing much was planned, but Maribah Button did state that she remembered looking out the window on June 30th and seeing the cavalry troops standing ready in case there was any trouble on the new holiday. Thankfully, there was not. In the nation's capital of Ottawa, it was an event to remember. William York, a member of the 43rd Battalion, said that on the day the country was born, as the clock struck midnight, cannons on the riverbank fired. The battalion then fired a 21-gun salute to herald the birth of Canada. Troops then marched in their best uniforms through the streets, and throughout the day, teas, garden parties, dinners, and dances were held. One of the most interesting aspects of that day was the first ever transatlantic cable from a member of the royal family, when Queen Victoria sent one to Ottawa to mark the big day. In Bowmanville, also located near Toronto, things began with a garden party for the citizens of the town. A band played, and the 45th Battalion assembled for the day to march. To help with the festivities, the town allocated $60 for providing the men with refreshments. Now heading over to Brantford, there was actually no organization for Dominion Day until June 21st. At that point, council decided to host a public meeting, and on June 25th, it was decided $400 was to be allocated for the celebration. Despite the short notice, huge crowds came out for the 6 a.m. royal salute that was fired in Victoria Square. At 10 a.m., a parade was held down Colborne Street. 2 hours later, marchers paraded through a green arch on Market Street and were joined by volunteers at Terence Hill, where a firing salute was conducted. In the city that many expected to be the capital of the country, but ended up being the capital of Ontario, Toronto had bells ringing at St. James Cathedral when the clock struck midnight. Bonfires, military displays, and fireworks were held, and entertainment was available throughout the city. At the end of the night, at a banquet, both John A. Macdonald and George Brown were in attendance. Now out on the open ocean, a man by the name of Copland Collard was sailing for a new life in Canada when Dominion Day happened. The captain of the ship stood on the deck with the passengers and drank to the health of the new country. In Sarnia, Ontario, festivities began at 11 a.m. with the marching of the two more infantry companies and the Sarnia Infantry and Artillery companies from the town hall to the parade grounds. Following the troops was a procession that included the town clerk in a carriage and employees of the Sarnia Bank. Also included in this were 4 young virgins in white, pulled in a carriage, as representatives of the 4 provinces. Speeches were also held, including one by future Prime Minister Alexander Mackenzie, who praised Canada's nationhood over the United States as being bloodless. At 4:30 p.m., the cornerstone of the new Presbyterian Church was laid down and a grand fireworks display closed out the day. It was a big day for Whitby, Ontario, and the firm of Lowes and Powell named their building the Dominion Warerooms in honor of the day. The colonel of the 34th Battalion ordered all the volunteers to be organized for the day, and thanks to the fine weather, many residents of the country began arriving, and it was not long before 8,000 people were watching Lieutenant Colonel Fairbanks and his volunteers parade through the community. Following a luncheon, a grand sham battle was fought, and dinner was served at 4 p.m. A torchlight procession was formed at the newspaper office and was headed by the Whitby Band and the band of the 34th Battalion. Fireworks were held at the end of the day. Now, while most communities in Ontario were happy to celebrate Dominion Day, this was not the case in Nova Scotia. For Halifax, less than half the stores actually closed for the day, and both newspapers printed obituary editions with broad black lines between columns to mourn the death of Nova Scotia. The Britannica statue at the post office was also draped in black. Despite all this, a parade was still held, along with a grand military display at the Commons. Fireworks closed out the evening. In Berlin, later to be called Kitchener during the First World War, 5,000 people came out to celebrate Dominion Day with bands, parades, and the ringing of church bells. Speeches were conducted by leading citizens, and a march past and drill demonstration was conducted by the militia. A royal salute was held at 6 a.m. with 21 guns, and new flagpoles were erected throughout the community. The crowd that assembled was the largest since 1860 when the Prince of Wales visited. A firearm procession was held at 2 p.m., and games were conducted that included sack races, a greased pole climb, and wheelbarrow races. Winners of the event took home between $1 and $4. In Montreal, Margaret Lawrence describes going to the city with her sister Grace, thanks to a young man who invited them for the big celebration. Over 8,000 soldiers paraded through the city, and fireworks were held at dusk, lighting up the grounds of McGill University. Over in Belleville, Mayor Henry Corby announced that July 1st would be a day of rejoicing, and celebrations started with the firing of a cannon on Courthouse Hill at 12 a.m. At 9 a.m., the Mora Company Band began to play, and at 10 a.m., volunteers began marching down the street. A rifle salute followed, and God Save the Queen was sung. Lastly, in Hamilton, and only 2 weeks before Dominion Day, plans were put in place for the celebration. Everything began with the ringing of church bells and a salvo of artillery at 6 a.m. Mayor Benjamin Ernest Charlton read an official address from Queen Victoria, and a procession was held, followed by the firing of guns in celebration. While there were celebrations in many places in the 4 provinces, this was a quick look at some of those places. I hope you enjoyed this episode of the first Dominion Day, and if you have any questions or suggestions, feel free to email me at crwbaird@gmail.com. You can also find me on Instagram at Bairdo37 and my Twitter at Craig Baird, CraigBaird.